Well, you guys made it. You won. You got it to the end of the conference. And we're going to talk a little bit about burnout, which I think is extremely brave to have this kind of deep, heavy topic at the end of the conference. But we're going to end by integrating all of the things that we intend to do based on all of the fantastic action items that you've received from the other talks. And we're going to think about how to do that in a way that doesn't totally fry our brains and wreck our mental health. So that's the goal. But first, I would like to tell you a story about me having a meltdown in the dentist office. It wasn't quite that bad, but this happened 2 years ago. And I'm sitting in the dentist chair, and I start to sob uncontrollably. And I know we don't really know each other, but I'm not really a crier. Even though I'm a psychologist, I'm supposed to be feeling-oriented. I don't cry that much. And I have a pretty high pain tolerance. 2 10-pound babies, no medicine. So I can handle some things, but I could not handle what was happening to me in this moment. It was actually a couple of weeks after I had been at the Owner Summit in San Diego. And over the course of the 3 weeks before this particular dentist office visit, my life had just begun to implode for reasons that were outside of my control and really not my fault. My dad was diagnosed with cancer. My brother ended up in the ICU because of a series of bad choices that resulted in multiple organ failure. So I'm flying to Montana to be with my brother in the ICU. I fly to San Diego to be at Owner Summit. I'm trying to have sessions with people, do some biz dev, make some new connections, build my business, and then I run back to the hotel and I'm on conference calls with my dad's doctors at Mayo Clinic, and then I have my own conference calls, and then I'm talking to my kids, and I fly back to Montana to be with my brother again. While I'm at the hospital in Montana, I drink a cup of overly hot coffee because I was distracted and not paying attention. I burn my mouth. I'm hanging out in the ICU where there's lots of germs. Somehow one of those germs gets into my situation, causes an infection in my mouth, and I need an emergency root canal. It was not like a good time. So I was handling all of this, supporting my family, hanging out with my kids, trying to see my clients, take care of everyone else's mental health, which is my job. I don't resent that. But I get to the dentist's office, and big, brave Sherry just falls to pieces. And I look up at the dentist tearfully, having a root canal that I never intended to have. I've had 3 cavities in my whole life. I just did not expect that I would find myself in this position. I look up at him tearfully, and I was like, look, I'm going through some things. Whatever comfort measures are available, I want them all the drugs, please, now. So what I'm describing, I tell this story not because it's exceptional, but because it's super normal. All of you have had some version of this story, some version of a week, a month, a year, a decade, where the shit just kept hitting the fan. Probably even regardless of things that you were doing to try to do good in the world and manage yourself and make good choices for yourself and your business. So these kinds of moments are really human moments, and they happen to all of us, right? Who here has had a meltdown? Some form or another. So the thing about it is that when we do the kind of work that we do, you as owners, you as leaders, you as whatever your other special skill is, as a designer, as a creative, as a coder, as a marketer, you are someone who makes your living based on your brain, on your mind, on your capacity to be creative, on your capacity to solve problems. It's all about what happens between your ears. That is the tool that you have to bring to the world. So with your team, the people that you employ, you don't probably employ a lot of people who exist purely to lift heavy things. You employ thought workers. And so the most important asset in your business is the health of your brain. Your mental health, your cognitive health, your intellectual well-being, your ability to show up in the best possible version of yourself in your work. Your work depends on you. You can't outsource that. And so one of the most significant threats to the success of your business is sitting right in your own chair. When things go wrong, when things start to implode, it's the mirror that you have to contend with. And it's the mirror that we want to keep very healthy so that you can do the work that you are trying to do in the world. One of the things that we don't talk about enough, although I will say increasingly it's becoming more in the water, in the zeitgeist of these kinds of events, is the fact that being an entrepreneur, owning a business, takes a major psychological toll. You alone are responsible for what happens. You alone are the one who is up at night with all the thoughts about all the things that could go wrong, all of the things that you're responsible for, all of the hopes and dreams that you'd like to put out in the world, all the ways that you'd like to see your business grow and develop. The good things and the bad things, they all rest with you. And that can be a heavy burden. That's the thing about hard things, that they're actually hard. When you decide to go on a grand adventure, to show up in the world in this unique way, to make something where nothing existed before, you carry the load of that. So my work, of course, I'm a clinical psychologist, and my job is to help reduce the bad things that can happen. So I think a lot about prevention psychology. How do we take what we know about human flourishing, human thriving, mental health, and apply it in ways that help prevent bad things from happening? And then, of course, there's the other side of the story. How do we pick up the pieces and put people back together when there is a crisis, when their worst happens, when things fall apart? So that's what we're going to do today, is think about the specific phenomenon of burnout. When we just have no more energy to give. And I want to say that burnout, just like my dental meltdown, is not a product of being whiny or weak. It's not a product of not working hard, not planning well, of not having a great team, not hiring properly. It's none of those things. It's just something that happens when we step into this world of entrepreneurship where we decide to carry these burdens. So it's not a problem of the whiny or weak. It can happen to any of us. And again, it's one of these terms that I think has generated a lot of attention. We're throwing this term around. Many of you have heard the term burnt out. Some of you have probably said, I'm really burnt out. Some of you have said to others, you seem like you're burnt out. And I'm glad for that conversation, because I think the more we have the conversation, the more that it normalizes it and allows for the possibility of help and support when help and support is needed. However, I think sometimes we don't fully understand what burnout is and perhaps the gravity of it, what's really happening in the brain and the body. So we're going to talk about how to identify burnout in yourself and your team. What is it really? What are the signs and symptoms, so to speak? We're going to talk about how to prevent burnout in yourself and your team. And thirdly, to think about how to recover if you're already fried. How many of you have been burnt out or described yourself as being burnt out in the past? Okay. How many of you are feeling burnt out right now? All right. So there's some of us here. And how many of you have had a team member or an employee or someone who's close to you that you're like, okay, you're a little burnt out. All right. So burnout is not just something that tech folks came up with to talk about feeling tired. Burnout is something that has been researched for the last 50 years, largely by Dr. Christina Maslach, who is a professor emeritus at this point at UC Berkeley. And burnout is very specific to people's jobs. Burnout is caused by your work life. It's not the same as depression. It's not the same as anxiety. It's its own entity. And it actually has a proper diagnostic code, meaning that according to scientists and people like me, it is a real thing. It is not something that, again, was invented by tech folk or just describing a phenomenon. So when we talk about burnout, technically speaking, we're talking about three sets of problems or three symptom clusters. The first is physical and emotional exhaustion. And this is when we just have no more oomph. We are exhausted, we're tired, we start the day tired, we don't have a lot of energy. One of the kind of trademarks of this is a compromised immune system. Probably some of what was going on with me and my emergency root canal problem. Your body is exhausted and isn't functioning properly. So you're sleep deprived. Often this looks like people who aren't sleeping well at night, so they drink more caffeine in the morning to try to wake up, so they drink more caffeine later in the afternoon so they can be sharp for that afternoon meeting, which of course means that they're not sleeping that well at night. So extreme fatigue in your body and your soul, if you will. Cynicism and detachment. And this is a part of the burnout that is really about how we're thinking and what we care about. So this is resentment toward our clients. Like, really, you're asking for one more thing? This is frustration popping off, short temper with our teammates, feeling like we don't care about the people that we're serving or the people that work for us. We have no more shits to give. So there's this sense in which you perhaps at one point in your work were very passion-driven about providing a great service or a great product, but you no longer have any attachment to who receives that. The third component of this is a sense of ineffectiveness and lack of accomplishment. So it doesn't matter how hard you work, it feels like you never see the needle move forward. It feels like you have nothing to show for all that effort. And I'm using the word feels like intentionally. This may be counter to any body of objective evidence that suggests that what you're doing actually matters, makes a difference. This is a filter that flips on in your brain that sees everything through a lens of negativity, failure, and lack of meaning. So the three of them together make for a pretty terrible way to live. You feel like you're tired, you don't have a lot of energy, you don't care about the people around you, and it feels like all of this work and effort is for no great purpose anyway. So it's a crappy way to be. It's a crappy way to feel. And it really is, I think, a way of thinking about it is sustained deflation, sustained exhaustion. One author described burnout as the asphyxiation of people's ambitions, idealism, and sense of self-worth. So there's a sense in which there's just not enough oxygen to keep you going. I am talking to you. I know that some of you feel like, I don't really need the touchy-feely crap. I just need my people to do their work. And I get that. But I promise you, your people can't do their work if they're fried like this. So it behooves you to pay attention for the next 20 minutes and learn a little bit about what this might look like so that you can help prevent it in your people and in yourself. Nobody gets to escape this, unfortunately. The data suggests that burnout is very, very common. Burnout makes us suck at our work. And I think it's really easy for us to assume that if we tried harder or work harder, we'll be able to push through the burnout, when indeed that is not true. Burnout is accompanied by pretty significant changes in our biological structure and neurochemistry. So I'll tell you what I mean. But in terms of the commonality of burnout, it's about 30% of American workers talk about being burnt out at some point in the last year. It's about 30% of workers in the UK report being burnt out. That's a lot, 1 in 3 or so. And the thing that makes it a lot is that, as I mentioned, burnout has the power to really change our brains. We see structural changes, things that we can observe on a functional MRI in the hippocampus, which is important for memory, in the caudate, which is important for reward and our sense of efficacy and accomplishment. The putamen, which is important in learning. We can see visual changes in folks who have burnout. Their brains look really different. And one of the most significant changes that we see is an overactive amygdala. The amygdala, as many of you know, is the part of the brain that is responsible for generating fear, negative emotion, anxiety. It's part of our kind of our emergency response system. It tells us when something is wrong. It's a really important part of our brain, but when we live in burnout, the amygdala is overactive. It looks larger on a brain scan. And this is particularly problematic because of the way that the amygdala relates to the other parts of our brain. And I promise I won't do like a super deep dive into neurology. I just have to geek out a little bit. But when the amygdala is overactive, the amygdala is connected to the medioprefrontal cortex right up here. And this is the part of our brains that is really helpful in talking us through challenges. It's the part of my brain that's like, it's okay, Sherry, you're gonna be okay. Don't cry in the dentist chair. It's the part of our brain that helps us to rationalize our feelings and work them out. It's the part of the brain that like toddlers don't have, which is why it's very difficult to negotiate with a toddler. So when the amygdala is overactive, it causes impaired modulation or impaired functioning in the prefrontal cortex of our brains, and the connections between those parts of our brains begin to wear and tear, they begin to die. Which of course means that there's no brakes on our amygdala. There's no double check. There's nothing to slow it down. And we begin to see the world through our brain sort of marinating in anxiety with very little double checks to help us stop that process. So it becomes this really vicious cycle of negative feeling, of stress, of fear, and we lose our ability to objectively, externally talk ourselves through it. It's hard to get out of. And if that doesn't sound bad enough, employees who are in the top 20% in burnout inventories had a 79% increase in the risk of a coronary heart disease. And this is a study that was done in Israel with over 8,000 participants, so a pretty statistically robust study to be able to see these differences. So basically, burnout is like frying our brains and really bad for our bodies. It can derail our work, and it can be deadly. So, thanks for having me, Carl. It's been really good to be here. No, just kidding. I think it's helpful to have the scary information because I want you to pay attention, but also because it is real. I'm not making this shit up. But before we transition into what can we do about it, let's take a little pause. Because one of the best things that we can do when our system is beginning to sort of bubble up with this negative affect is to take a pause. So if you would, we're going to do a little breathing exercise real quick. We'll sort of set the rest of the evening off well. It's an invitation. If this doesn't feel like a good plan for you, that's fine. Don't do it. Just, sit quietly and don't poke your neighbor while they're doing it. So put your feet flat on the floor. Uncross your ankles, uncross your arms, and lean back into your chair. If you'd like to close your eyes, you're invited to. If you would rather not, that's fine too. Maybe pick something to look at that is fixed and still. And just take a moment and play the quiet game. Let's see how still and quiet you can be. Pretend you're a statue on a park bench. Shift your attention to your nose. And inhale and feel the way that the air, the oxygen, is coming into your body. See if you can pull that oxygen all the way down to your belly button. And as you exhale, pull your belly button toward your spine, like you're deflating a balloon, and let that oxygen, or carbon dioxide rather, travel outside of your body, out through your nose. Sometimes it helps to put a hand over your belly button and see if you can feel your belly moving as you breathe. So as you inhale, your belly expands, your hand moves away from your spinal cord, and as you exhale, your belly deflates. Your hand moves towards your spinal cord. See if you can take 3 breaths that way. Slow breaths, breaths that go low into your body, all the way into your belly. And go ahead and open your eyes. Take a minute to notice how it felt to engage your parasympathetic nervous system. Simple, low, slow breaths are a really quick signal to our body's systems that all is well. There's no emergency, there's no fire. We can end the emergency response and return to a state of calm homeostasis. For many of us, we live at elevation, right? We live as firefighters. We're putting out fires all the time. That just might be what your job description is as an owner. And when we live in that elevation, we make ourselves quite vulnerable to burnout. And one of the best things that we can learn as a human being is to have some kinds of practices in our lives that help us have moments of calm, moments of safety. And sometimes that's just 4 deep breaths 4 times a day. Sometimes that's just a space of quiet to breathe carefully so that we can let our bodies reset a little bit. So that's one of the tools that all of you have available to you all the time. You can do that when you're on a call. You can do that in a meeting. You can do that on stage. You can do that in any moment of your life, just to shift your breathing and shift your breathing to be low and slow and calm. So don't say you didn't get anything from this conference. Burnout is caused by some very specific things. And again, we have 40 to 50 years of research now trying to figure out what is it that makes us go so haywire in our internal state as it relates to our jobs. So burnout is caused by not enough social support, not feeling like we work with people who have our back. It's caused by lack of clear, meaningful goals, lots and lots of work, piles of work, without clear, identifiable ways in which to accomplish those goals and check those things off the list. Too much work. I'm sure nobody in here knows what that might feel like. But simply having a to-do list that is totally in excess of the hours that are available in which to accomplish those tasks. That causes people to burn out. We don't like to feel like we're failing, right? So when we have a to-do list that's setting us up for failure, that's generally not going to be good for our mental health. Few observable or rewarded successes. So I'm not type A. I know some of you probably are. You're very good at being organized. But there's a part of all of our brains that is a little bit type A. There's a part of all of our brains that loves to check something off a list. So when we have clear, accomplishable goals, and then we have a way of marking when they're finished, our brains are really happy. So creating systems in which we have observable, rewardable successes is a great way to prevent burnout. I'll talk about that more in a second. But not having the opportunity to sort of celebrate when things have gone well is one of the things that drives burnout. Limited control over our work. Feeling like our time, we have these demands on our time and we don't get to choose what we do, how we do it, how we organize our days. Those Those kinds of things. Most grown-ups like to be able to make their own decisions, and we don't do well when we're not offered that ability or that power. And finally, perhaps most importantly, a mismatch between what we think is important and the demands of our workday. And I think as owners, you all know this keenly because you probably spend a lot of time putting out fires and doing things that feel like they're not really moving your business forward, but they must be done. So you spend a lot of time doing things that feel not very important, and that is, of course, a recipe for trouble. Okay, so because we know what drives burnout, we can then reverse engineer the process and think about, well, how do we prevent burnout? We know what causes the problems. How do we take those things, flip them on their head, and put good practices into our lives and into our businesses so that we don't find ourselves with fried brains and weak hearts? So first of all, first and foremost probably, we have to protect relationships. That means doing the work to figure out how to have as healthy of relationships within your team as you can. This is particularly tricky in a distributed team, but this means making sure you have some kinds of face-to-face meetings, that you get the group together once a year so they can be in the same room. I am a big fan of distributed teams. I know it works really well, but there is also nothing that compares to the biological co-regulation that happens when we are in the room with someone. Our bodies are reading other people's bodies, and it's just a way of connecting that is different. It's deeper, it's important. It doesn't have to happen every day, but it should happen sometimes. So getting key team members together in the room regularly, once a year, twice a year if you're distributed, making sure that we see each other's faces. So having face-to-face meetings, making sure you're on video when you're doing some of your team meetings. Having some lighter time within your business, lunches together, Taco Tuesday, things that people do within their businesses that create a sense of sharing and camaraderie and humanness. I don't feel like businesses are families. I don't feel like we have to do deep-level emotional work to manage the relationships within our business, but I do feel like we need to host the space with a sense of hospitality so that people feel a general sense of welcome, that their contributions are welcome, that they're valued. We also need to work really hard to protect relationships outside of work. So as a leader, that might mean that you're not on Slack at 10 at night. That might be when you choose to do your work, and that's fine, but that you aren't sending the message to your team that they need to be on during that time. Unless they do need to be on during that time, in which case you should spell that out super clearly. So some little things that can make a big difference are simply scheduling your emails to arrive during work hours. Perhaps you do your genius thinking at 2 a.m. That's fantastic. Write the email. Add a little widget onto your Gmail account so that it sends at 8:30 a.m. rather than your team seeing, oh my God, like my boss is working at 2 a.m. I guess I should be checking email in the middle of the night too. Because you want your people to have healthy relationships outside of work. You want them to be stable, you want them to be happy, just like you want that for yourself. That means respecting and protecting that time for them as well as for you. One of the best investments that you can make in your mental health across the board is to establish good friendships. And I get it. I know that your work is not a 9-to-5 job. I know that you're busy. I know that you work all day, you work hard, you go home, you have kids, you have other responsibilities, and meeting people at the pub just doesn't seem like a really high priority, but I want to flip that on its head for you because it's a super high priority. You need a community of people that care about you regardless of your ability to win big projects or pay the bills. You need a group of people that care about you because of your awesome quiz game skills or your ability to play darts or your ability to play frisbee. I mean, people that just like to be with you with no expectation, people whom you don't have to take care of, people who will bring you a sandwich if you're in the hospital. That is the psychological trait that makes us most robust, most resilient when really bad things happen is social support, is what we call it in social research. It's knowing that someone cares and someone has our back. And that cannot only be within your business. You must have other relationships. So I'm glad you're here. I hope you're making friends. If you haven't, tonight is your night. Go home with a friend, because that's what is going to help you when you are stuck, when you are lonely, when you are tired, when you are having a bad day. Also, when you are killing it and your business is thriving, you want someone to celebrate with. You want someone who gets why what you're doing is important to you and can, honestly whack the piñata right next to you. Just really enjoy that you're being successful. Number 2, let your business be a business where people can focus. One of the things that we have become acclimatized to that is most counterproductive to mental health is a sort of work cultures of distraction. Slack is maybe not your friend. Every time that your team gets disrupted, not only do they lose the productivity of that moment, but they lose the productivity of, it's a trace. It's your brain is still working on the distraction even after you've shifted your attention back. The more that our brains are divided into different tasks, the less efficiently and the less accurately we work. We think we're good at multitasking, but we're really actually not. Our brains are not designed to do that. So the more that you are interrupted, the more that your people are interrupted, the shittier your work is. So if you want to have a happy, healthy team, one thing at a time is important. And I get that people are working on lots of different projects, perhaps at lots of different times, but letting people carve out deep work time. If you haven't read the book, Deep Work, it's a really great argument for this small piece of this talk today. Making sure that you have time in your workday to do the deep dive, to do the thoughtful work, that you have your notifications off for a 2-hour block in your workday, where no one can interrupt you unless something is literally on fire, as sadly we know from Carl, it does happen. Making sure that you have time for your brain to really sit in a problem, to think. We have lost this skill, you guys, in our kind of fast-paced, we've sort of emphasized teamwork in a way that's perhaps not helpful because there's too much interruption, too much interaction. So setting aside time for team time for deep work time, so that we can let people make meaningful steps towards accomplishing the tasks that we've set out for them or that we've set out for ourselves. Does that make sense? All right, thirdly, manage the workload. I know this is hard. I know it's not easy. A couple of words that are helpful. No. Let's just practice saying that. Ready? 1, 2, 3. No. Here's another one. Later. Which means we're going to have to schedule that project out 3 months. We're going to have to do that at the future time. Should we say that together? 1, 2, 3. Later. And thirdly, one of the trickier ones perhaps to say out loud, but is knowing when to call in reinforcements to get more help. It's also creating a culture within your team that people know that they can use these words too, where they can say, look, here are the tasks that I have on my week. Here's what I'm doing today. Here's what I'm doing this week. And you've just added 4 more things. I'm not sure how I'm going to get this all done. How can we problem solve the distribution here? And let them say, I'm not sure how to do this all. And you can help them prioritize if they aren't able to do that themselves. So let's do help. 1, 2, 3. Help. We're not superheroes. And I know that you love your work and you want to be successful and you want your teams to thrive. But we have to be able to realize that there are limits to the number of things that we can do in a day. And as I said before, the mismatch between the to-do list and the hours that are available, it creates this sort of low-grade angst and dissonance within us. Whether or not we're keyed into it, we sort of feel it. We feel it in our bodies, this part in the back of our brain that's like, there's no way that's going to happen. If you find yourself thinking that a lot about your to-do list, that's the highway to burnout. That's a mismatch between what is reasonably possible and the resources that are available. And I don't really like math that much, but it's sort of finite, right? It's sort of concrete. Like, you can't make it up. All right, control and choice. Realizing that you want to be able to choose the things that are most important to you, which means paying attention to what's most important to you. So one of the things that I have almost all of my consulting clients do, very simple practice, the end of the day, what was your high point, what was your low point? Record it every day. It's 2 sentences, takes 2 minutes, not a big deal. But when you track that data over time, you can see very clearly what kinds of things are sucking the life out of you and what kinds of things are generating energy or are bringing you joy. And guess what I'm going to recommend? You choose to spend your time and energy on the things that bring you joy, and you hire out that stuff that is sort of sucking the life from you. Or you fire that person, or you fire that client, or you get rid of that project, because life is too short for us to continually do lots and lots of tasks that suck us dry, that don't feel like the best use of our skills and our ability. So embracing the fact that you run the business, you have some control, you have some choices. Also, passing that on to your team as much as is humanly possible. Having them do some of the thought work behind what projects they should be working on, what's a good use of their skills, how are they growing, how are they learning, what do they get to choose in terms of their own professional path. This is one of the things that we as humans just enjoy, the ability to choose. And to optimize for our own sweet spots. This is what I'm good at. I'm going to do this as much as possible. This is what I'm not good at. Here's my growth plan for that. And this is what I'm not good at, and I'm just not going to bother because it's so far out of my wheelhouse. Much better than forcing yourself to keep pushing the boulder up the hill on tasks that you don't enjoy and don't feel good to you. Have clear goals. You guys probably know how to do this at this point, but even thinking about breaking large projects into smaller increments. So at the end of the day, everybody gets a win. Starting your day with 3 things I'm going to do today. Maybe one of the things is like, send that complicated email I've been avoiding. Things that you can clearly check off the list, because as I mentioned, there's a little bit of type A in all of us, and our brains love the circuitry completion. We love to be able to say, okay, that's done, I can move on to the next thing. Creating those opportunities for yourself and for your team. And when those goals are done, have ways of celebrating. Build those into your business, whether that is a gong. Oh, there we go. There's the gong. This gong is at lead pages, and every time you ship something or push something public, you get to go and ring the gong. It takes 2 seconds, but it does disrupt everyone's day, so everyone looks and is like, oh, they did something cool. Great, I'm moving on. But it's a little ritual. It's a little like, we're gonna take note of this. And these wine bottles are my friend Phil's wine bottles. He has a company called Simple Pay, and he set these very specific goals, wrote them on sticky notes. I use this with his permission, by the way, and sticks them on a bottle of wine so that when those goals are accomplished, you get to open the bottle of wine with your family, with your friends, and say, this is what I did today. This is the satisfaction of a job well done. And finally, when my husband sold his company, I was like, hey, Rob, what are you going to do to celebrate? He's like, I'm going to get a tailored shirt. And I'm like, cool, I'm going to get a Porsche. So we have different ways of celebrating. I do let him drive it sometimes. But I think, and they don't have to be monetary, and they don't have to be food, and they shouldn't be gimmicky. They shouldn't be stupid. But thinking about what really does bring a little bit of satisfaction to you as somebody who works really hard, to your team as people who work really hard. And again, if you have a team, involving them in this process? What's a good carrot for us as we work together on this project? What's going to be that extra motivation? Not as a carrot so much as a celebration. It's delightful, it's joyful, it has that sort of positive, mushy aspect to it. And lastly, when you are thinking about ways to prevent burnout, you have to make sure that on a daily basis, you remember why it is you are doing what you're doing. We as people are capable of doing super hard things when they're important. We don't do so well with hard things when we don't care about them. We are capable of hard work, deep focus, great creativity, great problem solving when it matters. But when you begin to lose sight of why it is you're doing this, that is probably the most dangerous risk factor for burnout. None of us can thrive when we don't care. None of us can thrive when it's for no reason. So that means continuing to talk to yourself, but also your team about, hey, we did a great job for this client, and this is how the work that we did for them 5x their business. Or this is how we saved them money. Or this is how we are providing great lives and opportunities for the people that we employ. Having those, maybe you feel like they're touchy-feely, but those success stories at the tip of the tongue for you and for your team so that, again, they're connected to this is what the effort is for. We don't just make pretty things for the internet. We do that too, but also we make people's lives better. So burnout is a real thing, and it's something that if you haven't faced, you probably will. If it's something that you haven't faced, your spouse or your CEO or one of your teammates will face. It's something that really has a way of kind of sucking the life out of us, taking all of our air. And it's because we're human. We're not robots, we're not machines, and we have to have some sense of compassion for our limits and for the vulnerabilities that all of us come to our work to, come to the world with. So if you are among those who are feeling fried, or when you reach the point that you are, what do? Rest is helpful. When I talked about those imaging studies in the brain, it takes about 4 weeks of rest for the brain to reset itself. 4 weeks of not a lot of stress, not a lot of responsibility, to really let that neurocircuitry rebuild and recover. So there's not much way around it if you are truly burnt out, other than to take a pretty significant chunk of time away. I know that's not a popular message. I can write you a note. I'm a doctor. Rest is also not enough. It's not sufficient. We do have to get back to the why, the meaning of what it is that we're doing. And I think the thing that sometimes surprises people is that meaning is not one and done. It's not set in concrete. You don't usually have sort of one mission for your life that sees you the whole way through. Our why, our meaning, shapes and reshapes again over the course of time, throughout our adult development, throughout our family life. Our businesses look different at different periods. The things that drive you as a 42-year-old, I hope are different than drove you as a 22-year-old. If not, we should talk. But there is this sense in which we have to continue to adjust and expand and grow and check in with what am I about right now? And that means we have to spend some time in our own introspection. There's no way around doing the deep work. That means a personal retreat once or twice a year. It means perhaps a therapist. It means having a mastermind. It means having a journal. It means a way of practically, oftenly, that's not a word, routinely looking inside and asking, what's important to me right now? And how is that playing out in my business? How is it playing out in my life? Because it's not easy what you're doing. It's not easy to build something. It's not easy to build a team. It's not easy to hold up the world for a group of people, whether they're your clients or your teammates. But we don't want to put it away. We don't want to let it go. We don't want to get burnt out. We don't want to be broken. We want to have lives, I'm guessing, that are interesting and exceptional. We want to be satisfied about our work. We want to be proud of what we bring to the world and the difference that we make. And that's the big burden, you guys. That is the ultimate creative task, is that we are writing the script as we go. And it's a great burden and a great gift, all at the same time. And the best thing that we can do is ensure our success and protect ourselves from getting fried. Because I believe that thriving businesses are built by thriving people, and that if you really want to be super successful and have a life that is extremely satisfying to you when you look back at it at the end of your life, that there's no way around it but to do some of this inner work to stay in touch with what it is that you're about, what you're doing, and to carefully protect yourself from getting spilled out, from getting burnt out, from getting all of those juicy, great resources within you used up. So that's what I have to say. If you want more conversation, I can be found Sherry@zenfounder.com. This is my podcast and my book and all my things, and I think we have some time for questions.
All right. Well, we have some time for Q&A. You up for Q&A?
Yeah, I have time for
absolutely.
Q&A. And you get a present if you ask a question. Please ask questions. I am not taking them home.
And I'll tell you, there are answers in this book on how to keep your shit together. It's not just a title. So who's got a question? Got there? No? Oh, Kareem? Is this it? You ready? Look out, Trav. Watch. I was worried I was going to take out the light for a second.
So for folks who are building teams and can't necessarily, they're building up to being able to do an offsite if they are distributed. For us, there was a lot of value in doing the management retreat. Can you do it in small groups, or do you have to get everybody together as you're sort of growing the company?
You do what you can do. The more bodies in the room, the better. But I think having core teams together in a room is, there's really a lot of value in that too.
Thank you.
Thank you. I was just going to ask, how do you decide, or how do you find a person that can sort of be a business consultant, a therapist, to me, I think like a lot of the things you talked about, I could see in the world of therapy. I could see in the world of it would help my business. How do you not ask too much of one person, and where do you go first when you're like, yeah, I could use some help so I can grow my business?
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting combination of problems, right? Is you want to do the inner work so that you can do the business work, or those are very intertwined. And there certainly are some folks like me who have psychological training who are also living in the business world. So depending on where you are, a great sort of starting point is to contact a couple of therapists that are like easy to get to, they're local, they're in your neighborhood, and ask them, do you have experience working with entrepreneurs? Do you have experience working with business owners? Because part of why I'm showing up in your office is so that my business will be well. Do you feel open to that conversation? Are you competent to have that conversation? Okay. Is a good question. There are certainly a range of folks who do business coaching and other kinds of coaching that integrate both business health and your personal health. And I honestly would ask around, because there's also a lot of people that don't know what they're doing, that have hung a shingle. And so having word of mouth, having someone who's like, yeah, this person really knows what they're talking about. So if you're working with a coach, I would say that they should probably have about 10 years of experience running their own business in addition to whatever coaching training they have. That's kind of my personal benchmark where I think, okay, you probably have the experience that is going to be helpful to me.
Thank you.
Andy with an I.
Andy with an I. So I think we, as owners, have a lot of freedom in, withdrawing or rearranging our workload or finding a therapist. But we have some employees right now that are dealing with incredible stress and burnout, and without being at the level where we can hire to alleviate that, how do we help them and facilitate them through finding their own path in that direction?
Yeah, I think making sure that your health insurance package includes mental health care is a really nice starting point. I think also someone on your team can do a little bit of work to figure out folks that are either near your office or they do remote sessions and they're sort of known entities, they're tried and true. Just have a referral list that circulates around your office. Hey, if you need some help, if you need some support in parenting, if you need some support with depression, these are just people that we kind of have heard about that people seem to like. I think the blank slate is really overwhelming. It's like, I would like some help, I want to see a therapist, and you go to Psychology Today and they're like, there are 792 in your area, and it's completely overwhelming. So one really practical thing that you can do for people is make that process easier.
Okay, thanks for the talk. Probably you already mentioned during your presentation, but imagine if you are like studio of 10, 20 people, and maybe what's your first, maybe 5 steps to build anti-burnout strategy or policy with one company? Like, what would you start with if you would be on our place? Thanks.
Oh, like the first thing I would do?
Maybe first 5.
First 5, okay. Well, I'm gonna refer you back to my talk, but I do think that that having reasonably clearly articulated expectations is really helpful, especially when you're onboarding new people. The conversation is simply like, here's how to thrive here, here's what's gonna be problematic, here are the goals, here is what the win looks like. The more that you are clear and concise, the more that people know how to be successful. They have the keys to the kingdom. And burnout, again, is caused by this like gap of like, I'm doing all this work, but I'm not seeing anything accomplished, and my boss still isn't happy. So clear communication around expectations and what needs to happen in order for someone to be successful, I think, is a really great way to start. Flexible work arrangements, good health care. There's a lot of things, of course, but I think I'd start with just simple clarity.
Thank you for the talk. I could check almost every box, which was kind of depressing, but I guess I'm probably not alone here.
I don't think you're the only one.
No, I don't think I'm the only one. Anyway, I liked your concept of like legit trying to take 4 weeks off. And I've thought about doing that, and I've like kind of worked hard to get myself in a position where I might be able to do something like that, or really take it easy for 4 weeks. How would you deal with like the loneliness of doing that though? Because I don't have anybody to, do it. Obviously my partner would be still working heavily in the business, and all my friends have jobs. So it's not like I can be like, hey, let's go on a motorcycle trip across the country for 4 weeks. That sounds awesome, but I don't want to do it myself. That sounds really lonely and boring.
Yeah, I do think that burnout recovery is a little bit different than vacation. And it's probably a time of a lot of reading and long walks and a little bit quieter, a little bit more contemplative. I do think if you plan it out, you can probably find some folks who can take a couple days here and there to do things with you. Mm-hmm. But I wouldn't say this is the time to like motorcycle through Europe. Like it's recovery. It's sort of like if you've had an injury and it's like you can't go to the gym, you gotta ice and elevate for a month.
Right.
That's a little bit of what we're talking about psychologically. It's also a great time to have a therapist or a coach or someone who you're in a lot of dialogue with during that recovery period. So I would like double up on those sessions during that month off.
Great, thanks.
Hello. Could you give me some information on how sort of burnout and recovery from burnout might be different or impact for like non-neurotypical brains, ADHD, autism, or high-functioning autism?
I know a little bit about that. I have one of those in my family. That's a great question. I want to think about that a little bit more to be very specific. I don't know that it is tremendously different in the sense that brains still need quiet space, like with less stimulation to recover and rebuild. So I think that rest component would still be indicated. I think the stressors that someone experiences with a neuroatypical brain are a little bit different, and so, less perhaps human interaction or different types of human interaction, managing sensory stimulus in a way that is a better fit for your specific needs. So generally the same kind of plans would be indicated, but then there might be some tailoring that would go along with someone's own individual way of resting. We can talk more offline too. Andy?
Great talk. Question for you on meditation. There's been a lot of talk about that in my Vistage group. Do you see that as part of recovery or part of maintenance?
Yeah, so the data on meditation and practices like that, including yoga, is really, really quite robust in terms of how that helps our brains be calm and relax. So it's sort of popular and cool, but it's popular and cool because there's a lot of science behind why it works, which is sort of ironic because it's a really old practice, but now neuroscience have to put their stamp of approval on it. So if the question is, does it work? Yes. Is it easy to practice? No. Is it a skill like any other skill? Yes. So having sort of small doses, like using an app like Headspace, there's a couple of different apps that are a gentle onboarding into a meditation practice. Probably what underlies the power for meditation and for yoga in terms of mental health outcomes is the breath component. Because of the way that the vagus nerve, so the vagus nerve attaches to the brainstem and goes all the way through our spinal cord and has little tendrils that touch basically all of our major organ systems. I know, I won't go too far. Carl's like, oh, she's talking about the vagus nerve again. But the ability to regulate and calm that nerve is most quickly and effectively done with that kind of breath practice that we did. And that's why it's so powerful, and we use it in all kinds of ways within the mental health community. And of course, breath is a big component of both meditation and things like yoga. So, yes, it works. You should do it.
Hi. So first off, I've been working with a business coach for a long time. Just want to put that out there. I recommend it. I also would be happy to recommend him to anybody. He's really great. He's legit. But the other thing really was just, advice for, I'm looking at my to-do list, and I would never get it done if I had a week to only do it. So how do you dig, you gave advice on how to sort of say no and push back, and but when you already kind of have taken on too much, what advice would you have there?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how you organize your stuff. I use Trello, so I have this day, this week, longer term, when I get to it someday. I think having a list that's parsed out in a very reasonable way by time, and on your today to-do list, it really should be 3 to 5, things you really know you can get done. Not build a new website as one, but log into WordPress as one. Really attainable things. So, I mean, if you are truly overcommitted, there's probably not much to be done except to bite the bullet and use one of those words, no, later, and help, to sort of reorganize things. I have found in my life, and I don't know about you guys, but I have found that when I have needed to say, hey, look, I am sorry, something came up or this thing happened, and I've needed to change or rearrange plans, it is so much better when I communicate that openly, honestly, clearly, as opposed to when I try to half-ass something that I really don't have the time or energy to do properly.
Right. Right. Yeah, I think there's that stigma where I feel like you've committed to something. I kind of hate to backtrack and say, you know what, turns out I can't get it done.
And sometimes you can soften the blow by saying, I can't do it, but hey, I've got 3 people in mind who I think would be awesome in this role, and I've got this friend who can, you sort of help to solve the problem for them if you really can't show up for it. Yeah.
We got anybody else? Yeah, Mark, go ahead.
Yeah, just one more. Sherry, this is not a question for you, but a statement for Rob Bean. Rob, you're over there somewhere. You asked the question about 5 questions ago, and Sherry can't say this because she's on stage, but the answer to the question is you hire Sherry.
Thank you.
Right? Isn't that the truth?
You can hire me.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Like she is the thing you were describing. That's what she does for a living, right?
Yeah, you're so good at marketing.
All right, we got time for one more. Anybody else? Any other questions for the good doctor? No? Oh, Mr. Ben Callahan back there.
Well, you quickly used the word co-regulation when
Yeah.
you were talking about getting people together. Can you just talk a little bit about that, what that is?
Yeah. Emotions are contagious. So when you are sitting with someone who is anxious or sad or upset, you take on that emotion to some extent. If you think about having an infant, those of you who are parents or aunts or uncles or have spent time with a baby, the way that you calm a baby isn't to be like, okay, baby, let me objectively talk you through the reasons why you are not actually tired and there's really not a good reason to be upset. Probably not going to be effective. But you hold the baby and you rock the baby, and the baby has a sensory experience of calm. When we are in the room with each other, we're having a shared emotional experience. And if we are good leaders, we're managing that shared emotional experience that happens physiologically. Our brains are very sensitive to the sort of processes of someone else's body through mirror neurons and a variety of other mechanisms. We also are always collecting data about the people that we're with, and the data that we collect through a Zoom call is valid, it's great. We see people's faces, we get to know them, we know their voices, but when we're sitting with someone, when our bodies are in the same space, we're collecting all this other data that helps us to know who they are and their idiosyncrasies and helps us to read them and understand them in a different level. So, yeah. Thanks, you guys.